two speakers, and then we will start. So we have Kevin O'Donnell with us, who is a senior R&D manager at Canon Medical Research in the US. He's specialized in medical imaging standard and interoperability, and he's also a member of IHE Radiology and IHE International Board. And we have also Steve Nichols, who is the lead at GE Healthcare Engagement in the IHE DICOM and HL7 Standard Development Organization. He's also a member of IHE Radiology and ITI and IHE-Europe, and also the IHE-Europe Shara Zone Task Force. So I will leave the floor to Kevin to start. Kevin, if you can present, and we can start. Thank you.
Very good. And are the slides coming up okay?
Yes, perfect.
Very good. Well, thank you for the introduction. Thanks everyone for coming to attend. In a way, this serves Steve and I as well, since this is a little bit of a recruitment talk. We'd love to have more people participating in the profile development. So this discussion today will be about the different IHE domains that do the work to develop profiles, talk about how those profiles are developed, and some of the different ways that you can participate in the development of the profile. We'll be focusing on IHE Radiology on my side, and then Steve, who also participates in IHE Radiology, but is also on the IT infrastructure domain, will explain a little bit on that side. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar, I hope, with IHE as integrating the healthcare enterprise. It's right there in the slide template, even above the line here. But I like to think of it a little more specifically in terms of IHE being about tailoring and testing standards. And what do we mean by tailoring? Well, essentially, we are writing implementation guides for how to solve specific integration problems using existing standards. And that this is what we refer to as profiles, these profile documents that are developed in IHE. And then the testing half of what IHE does is about coordinating formal testing events, which bring together many implementers, many different implementations in a controlled environment to confirm conformance to the profiles. And this is what everyone will probably be familiar with as connectathons. So that is somewhat reflected in the structure of the IHE International organization, that there are a number of IHE domains within IHE International. Obviously, radiology is one of them. There's pathology and lab domain. There's IT infrastructure. There's patient care devices. There's a number of different domains whose job is to do the development of those profiles. That's the primary activities they're involved in. There is also different IHE regions. They're both national level regions such as IHE France or IHE Netherlands, as well as larger regions such as IHE Europe and IHE North America. And that their role is largely conducting connectathons to pair up with the last slide. But of course, they do a lot of other things, such as this lovely webinar that we're doing today. There's a lot of really good education being done. IHE-Europe actually is a bit of a standout in doing quite a good job in educating both the vendor side, who are implementing the profiles, and the user side, the hospitals and healthcare organizations that are deploying them in the field. So if we look at one particular domain, any particular domain, so for example, IHE Radiology, they will all have a planning committee whose job is to solicit proposals for what profiles should we develop next. Those proposals can come from vendors, from hospitals, really from anyone in the community can put together a proposal for what is a key interoperability problem that we need to have a more clear implementation guide to select the appropriate standards to constrain those standards. So the soliciting proposals and selection of proposals is largely the job of the planning committee. Each domain also has a technical committee, and their job is to create the profiles. We'll get into that a little more in the next slide. And once the profiles are developed, essentially it's pushed back to the planning committee. We don't do a great job of this, but the planning committee then is also about promoting those profiles. Largely, once they're published and available on the website, they're out there. The regions, of course, are promoting adoption of the profiles by vendors and users, but the domain planning committees should be hopefully partners in that, in helping prepare some of the content, a little bit like Steve and I are doing today to get the good word out. So if we look at the profiling development, you can think of it in roughly 3 main phases. The first phase is drafting and brainstorming. This is really fun. So for those of you who love, getting around a whiteboard, putting different ideas up, talking about the different viewpoints, trying to reach some consensus across the different vendors and users involved, it's honestly one of my favorite parts of the process. We're trying to document the use cases, because for the solutions to work well, the most important thing is to have a good understanding of what the problem is, what we're trying to achieve, and in particular, internationally, what we're trying to achieve. The use cases can vary between, say, IHE Japan and IHE Switzerland, that there are various details that may differ a little, and we need to make sure that the profiles are adaptable internationally. It's useful if there's that common international core, because then vendors can develop a single product approach that can be deployed worldwide. Some of what goes on next then is looking at the use cases and thinking about the implementation guide. The profile is to identify the transactions, the actors, and the content. So IHE is about interoperability and integration. It's about systems talking to each other. And so those systems are the actors, and the transactions are the communications between them. And so sometimes we're standardizing the protocols between the actors. Sometimes we're standardizing the content that is carried on those transactions. So some profiles will be more workflow oriented and will be a little more focused on the transactions and not worrying so much about the content. Others will be the other way around, much more focused on a particular type of content. So having identified those, we need to get an agreement on what standards are we going to use to implement each of those, what goes into the implementation guide. Wherever possible, IHE is trying to use existing standards. Obviously, in the case of radiology, DICOM is one of our foundation standards. In IT infrastructure, HL7, the V2 messaging protocols are a key part of a lot of the early profiles. Almost all of the newer profiles now are focusing heavily on FHIR. And as well, because it's broad IT, there'll be various other security standards, et cetera, that are in play. We try not to do anything too fancy. Use the most obvious standards that are applicable to the use case. The next part is to write normative text about how to apply that standard to that particular profile's use cases. One of the great things about the standards is that they are very flexible and they have a lot of different capabilities available in them. One of the bad things about the standards is they are very flexible and they have a lot of different capabilities within them that you can apply. It's like, I tell people, it's like having a Swiss Army knife. If you hand that, with 12 different blades, and inevitably, if you hand it to 2 different people, they're going to pick 2 different blades for doing a particular job. And if the vendors are using different parts of the standards in different ways, they're not connecting properly. So part of what it's good that the standards are flexible, they're adaptable to any problem that's out there. In the case of a profile, we have picked one particular problem, and so we will agree on one specific way and specific components of the standards to solve that specific problem. And part of the profile is then we're all agreeing to do it that way so that we interoperate. Inevitably, there will be some open issues left at this stage. We can usually work out between the people in the room what the consensus is for how things work, but sometimes we think there's still more feedback we need from the wider community. And so at the end of this phase is what we call public comment. And so the documents are published to be available on the internet to essentially anybody. You do not have to be a member of IHE to participate in public comment. So the public comment period usually is about a month. It varies, sometimes by profile and logistics of the year and by domain and the like. But there's roughly a 1 month period where things are open for comments. Things can be emailed in. Steve will get a little bit into some of the mechanics of that on the participation segment. But once we've collected all of these comments, we love getting them from a wide range of people. The committee meets again to go through review and resolve those comments. Usually it means revising some of the profile text. There's always a lot of good ideas that come in the comment phase. And our goal then is to close those open issues. If you're out reviewing public comment, please pay close attention to the open issues section as well. Because those are the things the committee is really hungry for feedback from the wider community about, which of these two approaches is the most reasonable, or, take a look at what we've done here. We've done it, but we're not fully confident. We'd like your confirmation or feedback on whether that was the right way to go. Once that's complete, we release what we refer to as a trial implementation version of the standard, of the profile. Public comment, don't go implement. Well, I mean, if you want to prototype it in a sandbox just to see how it works, that's fine. But don't go putting that into, hospitals for use. The whole idea of public comment is the ink is very much wet. We're still playing around with things. But trial implementation is where we've said, okay, we are pretty confident in this profile now, but there's one more test that we'd like to do, which is we would like to test the specification, that the second connectathons are not only about testing your conformance to the specification. The first connectathon for a given profile is also a test of the specification itself. Is it implementable? Is the text clear? And so the goal here is we want to get our profile to final text. So trial implementation is pretty stable. We are not going to make any breaking changes unless we have to. And the idea is that once we've been through a connectathon, we've been able to get a few implementers out there to try implementing it, try connecting to their partners, make sure everything's working the way we expected. Then we etch it in stone, and we're definitely not going to change it any further. So trial implementation, mostly stable, final text, fully stable. And then here's a bit of a diagram on some of the different players involved, which we've mostly been focusing up here on the definition and publication of the profiles. But perhaps on another call, we'll get into some of the wider dynamics of how a profile fits into the IHE ecosystem. So at this point, I'm going to take you on a bit of a wiki tour of IHE radiology, and then a little bit later, Steve's going to take you on a similar tour of IT infrastructure, in part so you can compare and contrast. So all of the material so far is common to all the radiology domain, or all the IHE domains. What you'll see next can vary a little bit from one domain to another, and so you'll see that a little bit in what Steve and I are presenting. So radiology is an example of a domain that uses what we refer to as an annual cycle. And so each year, in the case of radiology, it's in the summer. In July, we put out general announcements. And so there's this annual intake and selection of new work items. We'll put out a call for what should we work on this year. Those get written up And the planning committee does a two-phase ranking. First, they go through and make a short list of the most likely proposals. The technical committee does an evaluation, which we'll see in a few moments. And then the planning committee does a final selection. And our target is where we work on the top 2 or 3 proposals. We want to focus and we want to finish quickly. And so that means, and our goal is, as you'll see a few lines down, our trial implementation publication target is 8 months after selection of the proposal. So those steps you saw a couple of slides ago, the drafting, the public comment, the resolution, the preparation of trial implementation, we want that to be all completed within an 8-month period. All of the meetings, all of the comment periods. And so one of the other things that I personally quite like this approach because it forces us to scope our proposals down to something that is both useful and completable in one cycle. This is a little bit of your sort of minimum viable product type approach. Let's get something concrete, useful, and something we can get out the door reasonably quickly. The schedule then is fixed for the brainstorming, the public comment, the trial implementation. In the case of radiology, as you'll see, it's usually selection is at the end of October. November is when we're doing our brainstorming. We meet in January to get the documents prepared, and they usually go out for public comment in February, March. We meet again then in sort of March, April for our resolution and trial implementation preparation. That's a bit of a tongue twister for this hour of the day. And then that goes out the door roughly in June or July timeframe for trial implementation. And one of the North American Connect-a-thon's been moving around, but it's usually been either the very end of the year or the very beginning of the year. So either side of New Year's is the first opportunity to test. So as I said, this is our target is an 8-month development cycle. The unselected proposals can be resubmitted the next cycle. That's happened actually quite a bit, and often they manage to bubble to the top in a subsequent cycle. It's also possible that we get phase 2 proposals. So in the third bullet there, you saw that we scoped down the overall scope of the profile. And often what that means is we do, either a second sister profile or an extension to the original profile where you can implement the profile initially, and we add some additional actors or additional options later in a phase 2 so that some of those scoped out parts get worked on, if that's what the planning committee chooses as their priority. There are monthly change proposal meetings. That's pretty much common to all of them now. The idea with the change proposals is inevitably people will notice issues with the profile. If it's preferences, well, once the profile's been final texted, we're not going to make any breaking changes just because somebody thinks that they might like it better another way. The stability is important so that products and hospitals can have a stable environment to work in. But if there's something fundamentally broken in the profile, then the change proposals will fix that. Many of them are clarifications that there was parts that we thought was clear, but during later Connect-a-thons, we find out people misunderstood the text. We put clarifications in with those change proposals and simple extensions. There may be a list of codes for, different types of angiography procedures. And we had a list of 8 codes, and someone says, oh, actually, here's 2 more types of procedures that we'd like to do. So we need to add codes for those. So those sorts of things are pretty much handled on an ongoing basis. And occasionally there will be needs for exceptions to the cycle timing when we're synchronizing with, for example, HL7 cycles. If we're trying to make a profile on something that HL7 isn't quite finished developing yet, then we get a little bit locked in there. But for the most part, IHE tries to be profiling stable parts of the underlying standards. So let's go have a look at some of the things on the web. So one of the first links, which Steve will also be giving you a little bit later, but www.ihe.net is the main sort of face of IHE and what IHE is. So this is the marketing page, and lots of good information on here. Certainly worth taking a look to see what's going on there. There's also within that profiles.ihe.net. So if you want to go see what profiles IHE has, this is another very useful part of the domain. You'll see it's organized into all of the different technical domains that we were just talking about. You can go into IHE Radiology and find, here's our technical framework of all of the final text profiles. So once a profile is final text, it gets folded into the technical framework. You find all of the integration profiles themselves in Volume 1, all of the transactions that are underlying those in Volume 2, and then some of the content specifications and other things in Volume 3. Volume 4 is where we have the national extensions. We try as much as possible to have things be internationally common, but occasionally there are national requirements that require some specific extensions, kept to a minimum, but that's where you find them. Further down, and Steve will get into this, I think, a little bit later as well, is you'll find the public comment block. We've had recently the imaging diagnostic report profile to describe how to use FHIR for imaging diagnostic reports. It went out for public comment, and it is closed in May. And then all of the trial implementation profiles are in here. We're a little bit behind on moving a bunch of these to final text. It's much more fun to write new ones than to simply put a final text flag on some of the old ones, but we are trying to work through that backlog. But the place where the work happens, and if I can get past the interface here, there we go, is on the wiki. So if you go to wiki.ihe.net, you'll arrive at this page, and this is where most of the work is happening. So in this case, we can go to IHE Radiology, and here's our main information page for IHE Radiology. There's a link to the planning committee page and a link to the technical committee page. But here you can see this annual cycle that we were talking about. So while we're finishing working on the previous cycle, we're telling people start putting in your proposals because we're going to be selecting those in this case, actually, it was the end of September for this year. So all of the dates are there, it tells you where things are going on, and it walks us through this annual cycle. We do brief proposals, which we'll look at in a moment. We do shortlisting. There are then meetings of the technical committee to do an effort evaluation, which is something a little bit specific to radiology. A final selection of proposals that will fit within our development bandwidth. We meet for profile kickoff. This year it'll be November 11th to 15th. So if you're, I'll show you a little bit what we're selecting for this year. And if you're interested, here's one of our first face-to-face meetings. The meetings do require IHE membership, but they do have a dial-in. All of our meetings are dial-in enabled. So it's much more effective and frankly fun to be in the room. But we do try and make sure that people who can't travel, time zones willing, are able to dial in and join the calls. We'll finalize for public comment. Our current plan is late January. We'll have about a month, in that case, actually almost 2 months of public comment, and we'll work on reconciling the comments at the very end of March, beginning of April. And then I don't know that we would see implementations at the June Connectathon. It's going to be a bit of a tight window for someone to actually have implemented something, but certainly at the ones later in the year. And here's the similar cycle for the previous 23-24 development cycle. And if you'd like, you can go take a look at what's happened over the years. But let's look briefly at the proposals page. So this year, we actually only had a few proposals. We range between about 3 and 10 each cycle. And so this year we had 4. Oops, hang on. I'm looking at the previous cycle. Sorry, I should have scrolled up further. So the proposals that came in, the first one is actually one that Steve is the lead author on, which is to look at doing encounter-based imaging workflow extensions for point-of-care ultrasound. And if you have any questions on that, Steve will be the one answering them. Each of our proposals is, is fairly short. The original proposal is like 1 or 2 pages at most. It's describing what the nature of the problem is that we want to solve, a little bit of details about the use case, what are the existing standards that are probably, the sufficient tools to come up with a solution, and a little bit about what it looks like. The next one actually came out of IHE-Europe, and the theme you saw the next webinar will be about AI in imaging, and Dr. Mark Kemmerer had arranged a plug-a-thon at the Trieste Connectathon, and one of the outcomes from that is this identifying one key problem is how do we capture the data about AI result approvals for imaging, that when we do initial validation and acceptance testing at the hospital of the AI model, when the radiologist is accepting or validating results during the reporting process, and just general quality monitoring and performance monitoring in hospitals to detect drift of the AI algorithms, how can we capture this approval or validation information in a common way? The third one submitted was we have the REM profile. Radiation exposure monitoring is very widely implemented. Essentially all CT scanners and nowadays many planar X-ray, angiography, mammography systems are supporting it as well, putting out DICOM dose data for analysis. That there was a proposal to start getting into patient dose estimation from the physics community. And then finally, and this one also is Europe-oriented, the cross-community access for imaging, that we have a number of XDS implementations in Europe, and when you're bridging across XDS implementations, that's what's referred to as cross-community access, or XCA. -I is the imaging piece. And what people would like to be doing now is DICOM Web has been out for quite some time. And if you're simply displaying images, using HTTP calls of DICOM Web is much more convenient than using the traditional DMZ services. So they'd like to use the DICOM Web for cross-community viewing in an XDS environment. So that's what that one is about. So because there were only 4, they all got onto the short list. We did evaluations of all of them. The 3 of them, though, only 3 of them submitted their detailed proposals, which the technical committee met a number of times to do effort evaluations and figure out how much of the technical committee bandwidth they would take up. And based on those assessments, we determined actually that we could squeeze all 3 of them in this cycle. We still balloted, and there was some question of whether XCI was going to be too much for this cycle, but they decided we could get them all in. And so that's what the cycle looks like. On the technical committee page, We just recently made the selection, so this will need to be updated to our new cycle. But if you scroll into here, here's all of the meetings with their agendas and minutes and the like. And those typically show all of the information for what's going to be discussed. There'll be announcements that get sent out to the mailing list. There's the committee mailing list for IHE Radiology as a Google group, as is for most of the technical committees. So that's a bit of your tour of where all of the pieces are. And I think at this point, we'll hand it over to Steve to do a similar walkthrough for IT infrastructure.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'll talk a little bit about the IHE continuous development process and how we've adopted this within IT infrastructure. So a little bit of compare and contrast. So it's important to stress that we follow the similar or a very identical framework of having a technical committee, a planning committee. There are profile proposals, and we follow the same process of publishing profiles for public comment as well as trial implementation. So all of that is the same and relies on a lot of the existing IHE governance. The difference with the continuous development cycle is that we found in some of the domains that some of the work items were quite large and others were very small. And so to try and fit everything into a fixed cycle was quite difficult, and a lot of the large items were actually spilling over past the allotted time for that year cycle. So it was really hard to trim things down and have them meaningful and fit. And so with that comes a continuous development cycle. And this mirrors what a lot of vendors and IT shops might be doing with Agile or other types of continuous development processes. So within this, work items can start at 4 points during the year. So we have quarterly face-to-face meetings where we do our planning. Now, anybody can submit a proposal anytime they want. We actually evaluate those on a monthly basis, but it's really at the face-to-face meetings where we'll, have a review with the person that's advocating the profile, discuss the direction of that profile and let them loose to develop it. The other thing we usually do at those meetings is set a schedule for teleconferences to support the development of that profile. So instead of where radiology may meet at fixed cycles or fixed time points to have week-long meetings to discuss the development of the profile, we'll actually meet once, twice, even more during every month and have shorter TCONs where we'll go through the status of the profile development, help answer questions from the author, look at cross-linking with other profiles and whatnot, all of the work that goes into developing a profile. This gives a little more flexibility for project timing and resource availability. The one thing that that I've observed in ITI is that we'll have advocates from National Health Services, vendors that may engage temporarily during the development of a profile, and then they may not participate as much after, and that's fine. That's the nice thing with that is we have a flexible mechanism for working, and that if there's a really important project for your health service or you as a vendor or as an implementer, you can engage full time in the development of that and then back off when it's finished. So it gives a lot more flexibility in terms of participation. the idea was faster turnaround for smaller projects with the ability to handle larger ones. It seems most of them end up being larger because unlike radiology, there is a longer time to trial implementation. I looked at some of our recent profiles, and it does take 2 to 2.5 years from the time of assessment to trial implementation. So they tend to be a little bigger, fire-based, so that when we're working with fire-based profiles, we're working with a lot of the fire publication tools. We may actually be directly involved in some of the HL7 ballot cycles to address issues, or waiting on things to change in fire to help our profile. So there's a little bit more dependencies there as we start working with something like fire. We see, each work item moves through these phases, as Kevin had discussed, independently. So each work item is on its own life cycle, if you will. So at any given time, we could have projects or work items that are in trial implementation, several that are in public comment, some that are in development, and then we do have a queue of work items that are in that. We've assessed them, but we're not quite ready to work on them yet. So, and I'll show a little bit of how we do that tracking and how you as members of either IHE or even members of the public can follow along and see what's going on with the different work items. So supplements are published when they're ready. So that's a nice thing. So we work with the IHE International in publishing our profiles. We also in ITI have moved to a web-based method for publishing our profiles. So you'll notice that in some domains, profiles, and even some of the older ITI domain profiles will be in a PDF document, which is actually can be preferred because it's a nice tidy package for your profile. It's searchable. We also have web-based profiles that have lots of cross-linking, which is also nice because it helps you when you can link easily back and forth between volume 1 and volume 2, which is quite nice. And then we also have our own template using the fire publication tools as well. So we actually in ITI will end up working with 3 different formats for our profiles, but they are all consolidated in that same profiles.ihe.net that Kevin had introduced earlier. We also have monthly change proposal meetings. So just all the domains, this is something that we do. And then we have the nice thing with these continuous process is it allows to synchronize with the HL7 cycle. So you might have heard of a project like Gemini, in which there's a agreement to collaborate between IHE and HL7. And as we have Gemini-based projects, so such as in the devices domain, there's SDPI as a pretty big Gemini project. So that is leaning towards following. It's primarily an IHE cycle, but has been accommodating the HL7 ballot cycles as well through Gemini. So when you need the flexibility for that, the continuous process is nice. So I will show a little bit about how we do our planning in ITI. So several of the domains have started to use a combination of GitHub and the IHE wiki for organizing our planning. And so we definitely do our best to keep lots of cross links between these so nobody gets lost and things aren't in one place and not the other. And just even preparing for this, I was pleasantly surprised that we seem to be doing a good job at that. So So you can see this is kind of we call it a Kanban view, but we have these categories. So we have items, assessment, under planning. This is where the initial profiles enter into the work stream. And so you could click on any one of these and you'll get a link. Usually there's a link to a profile proposal. Some of these might be issues, just things that we get public comment on that we need to fix, but the bigger items we'll put here to track. We have some activities for converting some of our old PDF profiles into the FHIR IG publisher format. So there's all kinds of stuff in here. So this is a mix of profiles and I'd say bigger work activities that we have going on. One thing in ITI, as a lot of the base technologies or base standards evolve, we find that we are revising or adding features to a lot of our trial implementation supplements. So we'll see as we go through this, I'll point out a couple of those. But so a lot of the work items may not be developing something completely from scratch, like the point of care ultrasound profile or the AI profiles, but will be a substantial feature to an existing profile. So this is kind of the entry point. When we meet on our during our monthly planning calls is where we'll do an assessment. And so the assessment is I'd say a little less rigorous than what we see in radiology. We're actually measuring and counting units of work. In ITI and the continuous model. We look at an overall workload. So this is an estimate from the committee as, okay, is this going to be a high, medium, low development effort? Is it going to be a high, medium, low review effort? How much time is the committee going to need to review this? And then what's the impact for testing and our existing Gazelle test framework that we use at the Connect-a-thon? So we look at that and come up with a high, medium, low. And as items fall off our development queue, which is the next one, then we look for new ones that we judgment calls on prioritization based on what's needed for either global health initiatives or various other health initiatives, interest from the community, workload. So a little bit of a subjective decision making, but it is a consensus process. We decide on what the priorities of these may be, and then like I said, as we free up volume or resources here, or new actors, new folks engage and join our committee to work on something, then we can move them over to the in development. So you can see stuff that's going on now. CP maintenance is something that's always there, and you'll see a nice link between all the stuff in development and our upcoming face-to-face. I'll talk a little bit about that. Public comment. So the profiles in public comment are here. There are 3. There's a digital signature handling within JSON. So right now there's a digital signature profile for XML, and as we're using more FHIR and JSON implementations, there was a group that advocated to say, hey, you know, we need digital signatures in JSON as well. And so modifying the existing DSG profile to handle JSON. Scheduling for mobile is also in public comment. So this is a FHIR-based profile that allows a mobile or a FHIR-based user to access a EMR schedule. So this would be for either, say, a self-scheduling portal, or even a referring clinician could schedule something for one of their patients. So this is a FHIR-based scheduling profile. And then finance and insurance services, which we haven't done a lot of, but these are a lot of FHIR transactions in the area of finance and insurance. After public comment, we have our trial implementations. And so this list grows and shrinks. I'd say there's quite a few things in trial implementation, particularly a lot of FHIR profiles. We also track in here white papers. White papers are always considered, I'd say, a trial implementation and always available for comment or modification. And then we have one of the favorite ones, which is just, okay, here's all the stuff we've done. So, and some of these are, like I said, not directly related to development. I just caught one here. So there's, promotion of a white paper, and so we track things like that as well, just so we don't forget to do it, and we can keep status updates within our committees and make sure that we're promoting things the way we should to get the visibility. So a lot of this, as I had the link in the presentation, is described on this wiki page. So the wiki page is kind of where a lot of the committee information resides, and this describes a lot of information about the continuous process. So I noted this page was last edited in 2020, so that's about the time I think the continuous development process began to take root in IHE. Let's see, a little bit about the technical committee. So just like radiology, we have the wiki page, and in fact, it's structured very similar. There's links to GitHub, like I said, where a lot of the technical content and issues reside. There's just some long-standing guidances like the metadata handbook, just various stuff in here that's good for reference. And then we keep track of our meetings in very similar fashion. In fact, I'll jump to our upcoming October face-to-face, and actually the guys in the technical committee are pretty good about preparing this early. So they actually started to publish this about a month ago. So you can see how we've sectioned the quarters. We have links to all the work items. So if anybody is interested, more than welcome to listen in on any of these topics, or even just start following the links and trying to, to see what's going on with these profiles and learn a little bit more about them. As we get closer to the meeting, we'll add usually at the top the link for, I think quite a few of the domains are using Teams, others use Zoom, but this is where you'd find the link to call in. And if you're new to calling into these meetings as an observer, don't be nervous about doing that. We'll see an unusual name and ask for an introduction, and you're welcome to just introduce yourself and say, I'm here to learn more about digital signatures for JSON or whatever you're interested in. I'm here as an observer, and you're more than welcome in that manner. So checking time, I'll just go through a little bit to show you.
Might want to jump to the participation slides, or?
Sure, we could do that.
Yep.
Yeah, so participation. So as we started to talk about, there's lots of ways to participate. One, pretty obvious one for those, healthcare delivery organizations or vendors is to implement the profiles. So always inviting that, and in our IHE International, where we meet and have domain reviews, the domains are always interested in hearing and learning about feedback from profile implementation, whether it's a large scale or a small scale. We're always very hungry to learn about success stories or pearls and pitfalls with implementing profiles. So that's probably the greatest thing that we'd encourage here. Of course, joining IHE helps us a lot. It's always good to build our rosters and have formal engagement from organizations. The nice thing is, as your organization signs up for IHE once, you're welcome to join any domain, either in whatever level suits your needs. So as an observer, or you can engage directly in development of work items. Now, public comment, everybody is welcome for public comment. And as Kevin has shown, the links on the web page, we try to make it very transparent what is in public comment. And even as you read through the profiles, we'll ask specifically, we would like public comment on this particular item. So even if you look at a profile and look at the open items and see what we're looking for comment on, that's tremendously helpful with obtaining comment and improving the quality of our profiles. Everybody's welcome to submit change proposals. Usually as you're going through an implementation phase, you'll find things that could be an error or something that needs to be clarified, something that could be worded a little bit better. We're always welcome for change proposals. So there's a change proposal process. In fact, a lot of them you can just send to an email address and even a more or less free text form, and then we'll convert that into our own change proposal process that we talked about a little bit here. You can always participate in underlying standards such as DICOM or HL7. They both have participation links on their web pages, so that's another option. Joining mailing lists. So I touched on and provided links to the mailing lists here. So we have mailing lists for our technical and planning committee. These are, as you see, through Google Groups. But we also have in ITI a couple other groups. There's MHD implementers and XDS implementers. So these are also great groups to participate in or observe as implementers are working with these profiles and giving feedback, asking questions of the community. So there's a nice community around these profiles, and these groups capture that. We have the joint domain planning calls. So as I'd mentioned, we have the ITI and radiology current meetings that we touched on and talked a little bit about that, and then monitoring the profiles in development. So even if you're not actively participating in a call, everybody is welcome to follow what's in development either through the wiki or GitHub pages, and regularly check in to see what's going on, look for updates or stuff that's in development. So you can find ones that match your areas of interest. And so with 5 minutes left, I'll stop there for questions.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kevin. There's a question in the chat. Can you give the addresses of mailing lists to this chat or to attach to the mail with address of recorded presentation?
Yep. So in the presentation, hopefully these will come through. They're all hyperlinks, so you should just be able to click on these and get to it. You can also search for these in Google Groups, which I have open somewhere. Maybe not, but yep, here we go.
Third from the left, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can go to Google Groups with one of your Google logins and search for IHE, and you'll see these groups. So and some are public, some you have to request membership to, but there's usually you should get a pretty quick response.
Yep, and there'll be like a join button on the Google Group page, or with anything, send an email to IHE@IHE.net, and with any kind of question, and you'll usually get some kind of response. Looks like we have a hand up as well.
Yes.
Yes. Hello. I just wanted to ask a sort of general question about participation. Our team is currently working on document registry application, and I know that our developers encountered sometimes like an issue that in some of the profiles were some ambiguities that they would like to little bit clarify how exactly the wording in that profile is supposed to be meant, how is it supposed to be implemented. So I just wanted to ask, what is the best course of action for us in that kind of situation?
So two of the avenues, one of them is, as Steve was describing, the technical committee Google group often gets a lot of questions like that. And if it happens to be MHD or XDS, if it's an XDS registry, the XDS implementers is often a good place to start. So you can post a question there. You can also then reach out to the domain that developed it in the form of a CP, as Steve was describing, because honestly, if anybody had some question about the text, clearly there's some room for us to improve the text. So we do appreciate the feedback. So email the technical committee or post on the Google group would be two of the places to start.
Yeah, and I'd say if all else fails, there's, I think, also on the main IHE webpage and info at IHE.net. I actually just was forwarded a message from that last week. So so there are folks monitoring these inboxes, and I think the important thing is specify the profile that you're looking at and be as specific as you can with the area that has the ambiguity. So.
And actually a third channel, now that I think about it. So Lynn Fellhofer, who's one of the Connectathon coordinators, I know does quite a bit of this. If you're at Connectathon and there was an issue there that you notice, talking to the Connectathon staff, they're used to funneling CPs up to the relevant committees, because as we say, the Connectathon is both to test your implementation of the spec and to test the readability and implementability of the spec itself. So we're trying to improve both.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thanks for asking that.
Thanks.
One technical hint I'll give you on if you do engage in the public comment, most of the comment here buttons take you to a Google form, which has you fill out a form one by one for your comments. And if you only have one or two comments, that's great, that's fine. If you're combing through the document and you're noting a lot of things, which, you know, we often get responses with like 40 comments, there's also a link to a spreadsheet, you know, an Excel spreadsheet where you can just fill in rows in the spreadsheet, which you'll find to be much more efficient. But basically what we're looking for is, what do you think the problem is? And ideally, how do you suggest we fix it or improve it?
Okay, thank you.
I see another. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for the nice presentation, Kevin and Steve. I have a query. I'm currently working for Siemens Healthineers. So my query is about if we want to introduce a new transaction being part of an existing IHE profiles, will it be considered as a change proposal, or it's a new proposal? How it will be passed through?
So
go ahead.
I was going to say it depends usually. So there's usually a lot of these things would start as a change proposal. So and IHE and DICOM have a very similar process. So when a change proposal, an incoming change proposal is evaluated, we'll look at it and say, okay, does this fit within the typical size of a change proposal? If it's a big change, it may warrant a profile. I think most of the time it's not. And in fact, one of the radiology items that Kevin had mentioned around XDS, XCAI started out as a change proposal. And then the committee looked at it and said, yeah, this is a little big. We're going to want public comment on it. So let's do it as a profile. So it's a little bit of a judgment call with that. But the entry point for that would be through a CP. And again, starting with the profile, you know, a little explanation of what transaction you'd like to add and why. And then sometimes what we could do is maybe consider adding that as a named option to an existing profile. But if it's a big change, then it may be an update to a trial implementation or its own very own profile.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're 2:02, at least in the European part of the world. Thank you so much, Kevin and Steve, for all of the work that you are doing in the domains. All my respect, and for presenting it to us on an hour, middle of the night at your time. So we hope to meet face to face at daylight at one point in time. Thank you so much. And please note that the recording will be made available, and you can reach out to us for any question. We hope to see you next month. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.